Hi guys, welcome back. So today I'm in full lovely legs mode. so we're going to do a masking technique. Depending which way around I've put these videos up, you may have already seen a glimpse of these lovely legs. So I basically have my lovely legs, Tombstone Witch, sitting on top of a pumpkin, and this is the big and bold pumpkin. And I'll go through that in a second. So I worked out where I wanted her so that she looks like she's sitting on top of the pumpkin. And it's an enormous pumpkin. I mean, let's face it, that's one mama of a pumpkin. So I worked out where she had to go. And then I'm going to stamp, and I'm using a Tim Holtz stamp platform to be able to line up and be able to ink more than once. I love this thing. I'm obsessed with it. If it breaks, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I am then inking up with Ink on 3's Black Detail or Detail Blackout ink. I think that's what it's called. And it's basically a hybrid ink, so you can use for watercolors and alcohol markers. So I'm stamping that a few times because these are new stamps. And so sometimes you need to, the more you stamp them, the more condition they'll get, and they'll just work and stamp much better. So I've stamped that 3 times, I think that was 3. I'm too busy talking. And now I know she looks like she's in midair, but she'll look like she's sat on the pumpkin in a minute. But what we need to do is we also need to stamp her again. So I'm not even going to re-ink, or do I? I do re-ink her. Sometimes you've got enough ink left that you don't need to, but it's onto a post-it note that's got ink all the way, not ink, adhesive, like a temporary adhesive at the back of it, over most of that post-it note. So I just use that as my mask, which we'll then cut out. It did take me a little while to cut it out, I will admit. It was kind of tricky around her shoes more than anything. Yeah, so note to self, maybe I'll use, when I'm doing masking, maybe use simpler images to cut out, but it's fine. So I'm, again, just lining up my pumpkin so that I get him where we want him. Now, the pumpkin is the big and bold, again from Colorado Company, and this is called Scary Pumpkin. The reason it's called Scary Pumpkin, I guess, is because it's got the jack-o'-lantern face that you can stamp inside it as well. But you can also leave that off, and I think that's quite clever. And then there's a couple of sentiments in there that you can stamp inside the pumpkin, which is very cool. So I'm just using the pumpkin part, and I'm lining up as much as I can so it looks like her bottom and her hand are resting where they should be on the top of the pumpkin. So I thought I'd get this lined up first before I do the mask, because I figured this would be easier, especially that being a brand new stamp and stamp set, it's not conditioned. I've not used this yet. You know me, I will do these things first time around with you on screen. I don't practice beforehand. I don't got time for that. So we do this firsthand together on screen. So, and me and lining things up is not the best, I will admit, but I'm trying to work out at this point where her hand should be so that it makes sense where the stem of the pumpkin comes out. And I think this is kind of where I land up putting it. And it looks all right. It looks fine in the end. It's fine. It'll all be okay. But this is sometimes the hardest bit, and especially that this stamp is so enormous and it's got the center piece cut out so that you can also, add other bits in. It's an enormous stamp to then maneuver around and get where you need it. So now I'm going to cut out the legs and the mask, for my lovely legs, which I've done. And I'm hoping this is going to work because at this point I didn't actually know whether my pumpkin was still going to line up properly. It does enough, and I'm happy with it, and I actually love how this turned out. I think this, out of the 2 watercolor cards that I've done for Halloween with the lovely legs, you'll see another one. I think this is my favorite out of the 2. I do love both of them though. That's the problem. I think I'm like, but I think this is my favorite. Just purely because it's such a big pumpkin. So I'm getting her stamped, and I know her hand doesn't look right. It looks weird with the pumpkin over the top of the the other stamped image, which is masked off. But what you want to do with masking is you want to stamp the thing that's going to be in front of the other thing first. So that's why we had to stamp her first, and then we'll stamp the pumpkin. Now when we take the mask off, she's going to look like she's on top of the pumpkin, and the pumpkin is going to be behind. So everywhere the mask is that we've stamped over with the pumpkin is actually not, we're going to essentially remove that when we take the mask off, and that will reveal her underneath. It'll make more sense when we take the mask off. So now that I've stamped that a few times, again, because it's a brand new stamp, I love it. It's just so enormous. And we still need to do the sentiment, which I actually took from the Lovely Legs, the Tombstone Witch, which is where she comes from. And I take the Have a Bewitching Night. It's one of the bigger stamps in sentiment stamps, and it just made sense. I tried to use the other stamps that are the sentiments that are in the Scary Pumpkin set, but that just didn't work with how I'd placed all this. And then I also thought, should I use the jack-o'-lantern part? And I decided not to, which I'm kind of glad, because I wouldn't have anywhere for my sentiment if I'd done that. So this is where I'm just playing around with the sentiments and the other extras to see whether or where I need to put those, or where I could put them. So just popping that back on the carrier sheet. That's the main little sentiment. And then I will grab the sentiment I'm actually going to use when I get there. Tried to look at the I've Been Waiting for You, but that was also too long. Like it was too wide, not long, too wide for the area that I had. And then this one just worked. It fits in there really nicely. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go with it. So just lining it up somewhat straight in there. You know me and straight lines if you've been here long enough. I always say I can never line anything up straight, which is true. But, you know, it's Halloween, so I'm not going to be that bothered. But just getting the sentiment lined up in there. And then we will get that stamped. So using the grid line on the stamp platform just to somewhat straighten it. Again, I'm not overly bothered. I just don't want a really wonky sentiment. It's kind of one of those things, I think many years ago when I first started doing this, someone said, I can't remember who it was now, someone in the craft community said, if you're going to go, you know, if you're trying to do something straight, then you've got to get it absolutely straight. If you're going to go wonk, then go wonk. Do you know what I mean? Like if it's going to be askew, you know, if you're going to put your sentiment or something at an angle, then do it at an angle. So it looks like it was meant to be at an angle rather than trying to be straight and then being a little off. So I think now people, we don't overthink it that much anymore. And I can see just looking at this that is not straight anyway. I'm just going to say it's the curve of the pumpkin that makes it a little curved. But anyway, so got my sentiment on there, and then I will get the post-it note mask off there, and then we should be able to start painting. When I've done doing a little cleanup. And just while we're here, if you're new to my channel, thank you and welcome. We do all sorts of fun stuff on here. And I do a mixture of crafts. So hopefully there'll be something for everybody. So now the reveal. Let's see if this worked. I haven't done masking in a very long time. But look, she looks like she's sat on the pumpkin. Yes, her hand still looks a little weird to me, but it's, I'm doing a happy dance. Her hand still does look a little weird at that area, but I'm so chuffed with it, and I absolutely love how this turns out when we start painting. So for this next bit, these are my Magello Mission Gold paints. They are the best paints, watercolor paints I've ever used. I just love them. I have a lot of watercolor paints and I love them all, but these are my absolute favorites, and you'll see why. You'll see what my sky turns out like, and I'm like, whoo. So I have I have a clean cup of water, which does not turn out to be clean in the end, but that's fine. And I have a paintbrush. I can't remember what size I'd end up using, but to be honest, I just looked for one that I felt comfortable with. I think that's the key thing. Don't get too hung up on how big your paintbrushes are. And I actually paint the entire thing, including all the teeny tiny bits, with this same paintbrush. But I'm going to start with my sky and my background. So the ground and the sky bit. But I'm starting with the sky, and I'm drawing just a line of this blue. I think this is cerulean blue, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but it's a beautiful blue. And I thought it was dark enough. It's still quite bright, but I thought it was dark enough that I could use it as a night sky-ish. So I do paint it on thicker in some areas so that you do get this darker, moodier kind of look to it. I love it. I love how it dried as well. It dries so differently to the other paints that I have. So awesome. But what I did at the bottom there was I used the line of the pumpkin. There's a little line to the left, if I had it the right way up, to the left of the left side of the pumpkin, and that's kind of so that it grounds the pumpkin. So I always say that with images, try and ground your images so they don't look like they're floating in midair. So all I've done is I've used that line as a guide and then dragged my horizon, for want of a better word, excuse me, out from there so I can finish my sky, and then I'll come back in and do the ground in a little bit. So trying to remember all the bits that are not her so that I get all the sky painted in, and so yeah, that took a little bit but I think I find them all. So just between her arms there, and then I think there's a little bit to the other side of the stem as well. So what I also decided to do was, because the lovely legs are just that, they are all about legs. So there's lots of different occasions that Colorado craft company have brought out. Obviously I'm using the Halloween one here, but I decided, because they've got not really got any bodies, because it's all about the legs, I sort of extended that when I was doing the sky. So her outfit, if you like, it carries on a little bit further up. So I just kind of went with it near the top there. But that's the sky done. And do you see how you got like the darker areas of the blue? When that dries, it's, like I say, it's just so cool. And this is what inspired the card I did after this. I actually did this one first, then I did the other one, but I don't know which order I've actually posted them, sorry. But they're both with Colorado company. It's actually the same tombstone witch. So if you want to check that out, if it's not up already, it will be up soon. And I used a different brand of paint, which is very different, and it worked very different. Same paper, but very different, the way that they react. But I love the sky. I love that blue. And I find watercolouring the easiest of all the colouring. Like I love Copic markers, I love alcohol markers, you know, even things like, what are they called? The Zig Clean Colour Real Brush markers, the Tombow markers. I love them all, and you can watercolour with them, but give me a paintbrush and watercolour paint and I'm there. So this is what I was talking about, the ground. I've kind of used the bottom little line underneath the pumpkin as a guide for my ground, and then just used a darker browny colour. Can't remember the name of this one. Sorry. But this is just whatever takes your fancy at the time. So don't get hung up on this. Just grab some colours and have some fun. I took a lighter brown, although it's still a darker brown, because bear in mind it's a nighttime scene. It's still a darkish brown, but it's lighter than the ground, and it's actually got less red in it than the ground does. And I just pop that onto the stem. Now, if you find that you've got too much paint over the top of your image lines, just clean your brush off and have it as sort of dry as possible, and then the paint will literally the paintbrush will kind of like suck up the paint, the excess like moisture that's there, and you'll be able to just lift it off that those lined and detail images, detail part of the image, so that it's not sort of basically blurring all of that. So the next bit is the big pumpkin. Now, I thought this was going to take me ages, which is also partly why I decided to watercolor it, because I thought it'd be the quickest way to color this in. I've seen some amazing artwork online where people have used alcohol markers and they've colored this enormous pumpkin in. I don't have the patience for that. It's probably why I love watercoloring, but that would take a lot of time and trying to get the shading right and all that sort of thing. Watercolors have a mind of their own, partly why I love them, because what happens and how it plays, like the pigment and the water, how they play together. Sound like I know what I'm talking about here, but the way that they play together works, and it just, I don't know, when it dries, it just dries in this beautiful way, and it works, and it's easy, and you don't have to overthink it. What I will say though is when you're watercoloring, just be aware of how wet another area might be. So when it comes to, say, where can I say, so on the edge where the sky, like we did the sky, then we did the ground, and that bottom part of the sky where the ground and sky meet was dry enough that I could put the ground in without the two colors trying to blend together. So if one's still quite wet, it will try and soak and go into the next color. So if that's not the look you're going for, then you need to just make sure that each area that you're going next to with a new color is dry enough. Doesn't have to be completely dry, but just dry enough that it's not got too much moisture that it will want to grab a hold of that. So with the pumpkin, I will come back in and add some brown later on, just to, again, it's a nighttime scene. I wanted it to look a little darker. And I tried to go around the sentiment to sort of leave it so that it was quote unquote highlighted more. No, it did not work the way it was supposed to in my head. And so eventually I will just go over the top of it completely because it wasn't looking how I imagined it, which is fine. But I do still leave it a little paler there so that it's sort of more highlighted in that area. But I do paint over the entire thing in the end. Yeah, it's just the way it worked out. So once I've done that, I will then get, I think I do the brown part of the pumpkin. So the bottom part is not totally dry. You can even see the shiny bit means it's still wet. But I'm taking some brown, I think it might be the same color as the stem, and just kind of adding it in. And while that's still wet, it'll help to sort of blend it a little bit. So this is what I was saying about how if you've got colors next to each other, they might want to pick up and blend together. In this case, I actually want them to do that because I want the color of the pumpkin to not be so bright in your face orange. I want a little bit of a dulled down, kind of like it's just come out the dirt kind of color on there. So I'm just adding a bit of that. I think I just did the bottom, I can't remember now. But I would just get a bit of that on, and it just kind of mutes that orange so it's not so in your face. So I don't think you would want that bright and orange. I mean a pumpkin, sorry. And then round the edges there, I took some water and my brush just to try and make those edges around the sentiment or near the sentiment. The lines kind of got too too liney, if that makes sense, like too straight. So you can just add a bit more water and let it move a bit. So as long as it's damp, you'll be fine. Some watercolors, once they dry permanent. So just be aware of that. And then, you know, work with it and play with it. But the best thing is to play with them. Do some research on the company and the colors that you have, and see whether, you know, how they're meant to play. And then the more you get used to them, the more that you'll just want to play with them all the time. So I did put some brown at the top of the pumpkin. Yeah, I did forget that bit. But now I'm going to start on her. And I'm going to go with a black hat, of course, for her, the main part of her hat. And I believe, does her outfit become... I go with purple and black, basically, for the outfit and the hat and her shoes, etc. So, yeah, just can't remember. I should have the cards in front of me when I'm doing this, but anyway. That's life. So just adding some black on there, onto the hat. And my paintbrush, even though it's quite a large paintbrush, and I've literally used the same one for the entire thing, so I've done the background, I'm doing all this finer detail here. The tip of this brush actually has quite a fine point, so I think that's why I'm able to do the smaller areas. Not all paintbrushes would be like that. I want to say it's a size 6 or something, but you know, oh yeah, size 6. And I think these ones I got from, I want to say The Works. It's just a very inexpensive little, it's kind of a bookstore, but they sell like arts and crafts stuff in there as well. And yeah, most of my paintbrushes are not expensive brushes at all, but they're actually quite good. So just because something is really expensive doesn't mean that it's going to be, you know, like better than a cheaper version. I've also had some that are very bad. So cheap isn't always good, but you know, if you need to save your budget, then I would start with, or if it's the first time you're doing some watercoloring, then I would start with a cheaper brush, definitely, you know, until you're used to it and you like it, because you may not like this as a form of art. But until you like it, then and you're happy to invest in it, then you can start looking at more expensive brushes and more expensive paints and things like that. But I got to say, my Magellos are my babies. I love them. They are awesome. But they were very expensive, I will say. I got them as a birthday present from my husband many years ago now. But I love them. They're a good quality paint. They're very, very highly pigmented, very good quality, but you do pay for it. So there is that. But I love them. They're great paints. The other ones I like are Gansai Tambis. They were really good paint as well. Not as expensive as the Magello Mission Golds, but they are also very good quality, and I do love them. I need to drag them out again as well. And then I've literally got some that are, I think they cost me like £3 or £3.50 for like a set of, you know, there's like, I want to say like you used to get when we were kids, those little paint pan things, and they've got like 36 colours in them or something. Yeah, I have some very inexpensive ones of those, and I do not like them. Those particular ones are like a chalk paint, which I think that's what I don't like about them. Not because they were cheap, but just because they're not a paint that I like working with. So that's the other thing. You'll get used to what paints you like working with more. I do not like the chalks. So, right. So I think I've got all the black paint that I want on there. And then I'm going to go in with some purple because it's my favourite colour. And it's very Halloweeny, I think. And purple and orange work really, really good together. Good together? That's not English. Really well together. And so do blue and orange. So the colours coordinate really, really nicely. So if you get stuck for that sort of idea, you know, what colours to use together, just grab a colour wheel, you know, just Google it. And a lot of, you know, even if you're just looking at the colour wheel on Google itself, it'll just give you some ideas of what colours, like opposite colours work together, those next to each other work together, so that kind of thing. So just going in for her her outfit, finished up the outfit, toned down a bit of the very pale brown for her skin tone, and then added it to a card base. Very simple, one layer card, but very relaxing to do. So I hope you've enjoyed this, guys, and until next time, bye for now.